Hello, welcome to Community Kitchen Teachables. My name is Anna and I work for Community Kitchen Programs where I run a program called Calgary's Cooking. Today we are going to talk about spices and herbs, what the difference is. So in front of me I have a little bit of a selection of some of the most common basic spices that you could use to stock your kitchen with. So let's get right into it and start with the two mother spices that everybody should have in their kitchen, and that is salt and pepper. So this here is just regular iodized salt. You don't need to go and get rock salt or Himalayan salt or sea salt, unless you want to, of course. But just for basic, everyday, generic cooking, regular iodized salt is perfectly fine. And then here I also have ground pepper. It is ground black pepper. You can buy pepper whole little berries, or you can buy it ground like that. The only difference is if you buy the pepper berries themselves, you do need a pepper grinder. And some people like to grind their own pepper because it's the freshest, but it's completely up to you. You certainly don't need to buy it if you don't want to. Ground pepper is perfectly fine. So salt and pepper are your two most basic spices that you could have in your kitchen. You can always tell when there's a little bit of salt in something and it's over salted, or you can always tell when something just needs a little something, and that's when a little bit of salt will do. Beyond that, everything else is basically just icing on the cake, shall we say. Okay. The next spice over, it's kind of a reddish color. This is seasoning salt. Now, some people like to put it on their French fries. Some people like to use it on their steak. Some people like to put it on their cooked vegetables. Wherever you think salt can go, seasoning salt you can use. The only place that I would not use seasoning salt would be when you're baking. If you're baking, regular iodized salt will be perfectly fine. But if you're doing any kind of savory and you need a little bit of something in your salt, seasoning salt is a really great addition. The next spice that I have over here is oregano and basil. Okay. Oregano and basil are very common spices that are for either Italian cooking or any kind of Mediterranean cooking. So to get the best bang for your buck, because spices can be pretty expensive if you have to buy a lot of them, my suggestion is that when you're first starting out and you're needing to go and get some spices, try to think about some spices that you can use in a lot of different dishes. So the oregano and the basil are those types of spices, because in a lot of Italian cooking and in a lot of Mediterranean style cooking, they share the same spice palette. So you'll get more bang for your buck. So the only time that I would start to buy specialized spices is if you're getting really comfortable in the kitchen and you want to start experimenting and trying all sorts of different ethnic dishes that maybe you haven't tried before. That would be something that you could look at doing. But when you are first stocking your kitchen, get yourself some spices that you can use in all sorts of different dishes, so they're very versatile. And that's where dried basil and oregano are really good for that, along with the salt and the pepper and the seasoning salt. Now, before I continue on with the rest of the dried spices, a lot of people are like, well, what's the difference between a dried spice or a spice versus a herb or a fresh herb? What's the difference? Where do I use them? Now, a dried spice is basically the dried root, the stalk, or the seed or the fruit of a plant. Okay? The herb itself is the fresh part of the plant. In a lot of cases, it will be the leaf or the root itself. Okay? I do have some fresh herbs here, just to give you an example. So the very first spice that I have right here, this is fresh basil. Again, really great for putting on pizza right when it comes out of the oven. It's a very common spice to use in a lot of Italian cooking or Mediterranean. The dried basil is right here. The next fresh herb that I have is thyme. So thyme is really great, again, for a lot of Italian cooking, a lot of Mediterranean style cooking. A lot of people like to put it when they're roasting a turkey or roasting a chicken. Fresh thyme is always good to add last minute to things, or you can always use dried thyme too if you like. And then the third fresh herb that I have here is mint. Mint is a very popular herb for things like adding on to something very last minute, giving a little bit of freshness to the item. A lot of people like to use it in their drinks. For example, a rum mojito. Now, when it comes to using fresh herbs, and particular with a fresh mint and fresh thyme, what I'm showing here is in this glass, I have some fresh mint. And let's just say that you want to make yourself a drink that has fresh mint in it. So maybe it's an iced tea, okay? So what you want to do is you want to take your muddler, and that's what this is. It's a muddler. And it has a rubber bottom or a hard plastic bottom. And what that does is it crushes the actual herb. And by crushing it, what you're doing is you're releasing the oil from the mint itself. So, and you certainly can smell it, and it's unfortunate, but I can smell the beautiful oil that's getting released from the mint. And that's what helps give mint drinks their flavor, okay? Now, when it comes to taking herbs, whether fresh or dried, and then making them a little bit smaller, that's where a mortar and pestle come in, okay? So I've got my bowl here, and then I've got my pestle, okay? And all I'm doing is I'm just working it. I'm just kind of going in a roundabout manner like this, and I'm just basically crushing it, okay? You don't need to do much of this, okay? You don't need to crush it too much. The pestle itself is actually got a bit of weight to it, so you don't actually have to give it a whole lot of effort to start releasing the oils and the smells from the herb itself, okay? A lot of people like to do this when they're adding, when they want to just, fresh is the only way that they want to go, and they want to release all that flavor in that oil very last minute. So that's where getting one of these is a great idea. Now you can buy a muddler and a mortar and pestle at any kitchen supply. They're not hard to find. Sometimes these could be considered a specialty item, but not always. I do find that they're definitely a lot more readily available than they used to be. Now, let's go back to the spices, the dried spices. So here I've got bay leaves, okay? A bay leaf, the whole point of using a bay leaf is to impact the flavor from the leaf into your item that you are making. So a really good example of where you would use this would be in things like soup or stews, spaghetti sauces, okay? The bay leaf is not meant to be eaten. I mean, you can certainly try, it's not going to hurt you, but because it's so dry, it will end up sticking in your throat, and it won't be a very pleasant eating experience. So what people will do is they'll use this, they'll put it into their spaghetti sauce or their soup, and they'll use it to impart the flavor from the bay leaf. But when it comes to actually serving the item that they're making, they'll just take the bay leaf out and discard it, okay? The next spice that we have here is garlic powder. Garlic powder is another very common basic staple item that you'll want in your kitchen pantry. You can use garlic powder wherever you use fresh garlic. The difference is fresh garlic has a little bit of a shorter shelf life because it is fresh produce, but garlic powder, it is dried, so all the moisture has been taken away from it. So it's a great quick addition to add to things like, again, soups, sauces, spaghetti sauces, stews, that kind of thing. The next spice that we have here is Montreal steak spice. Okay, you can get Montreal steak spice, you can get Montreal's chicken spice, you can get a few different variations of Montreal steak spice depending on what type of protein that you are using. It's a great addition to your kitchen pantry when it comes to building up your spices. It can be used in a lot of different ways. I use the Montreal steak spice for my beef. So for example, it just doesn't have to be on a steak. It could be for if you're roasting, doing a roast beef, or if you're going to be cooking off tenderloin, anything like that, okay? Again, very versatile, but it's not something that you absolutely have to have because a lot of people will season their steaks with just salt, pepper, and garlic powder. Simple, it can be just as simple as that, okay? Now, these spices we're going to talk about just a little bit separately. We're going to end it with that, but I am going to talk about these ones. Here I've got curry powder, cumin, and chili powder, okay? Most recipes that use curry will definitely have cumin. Most recipes that use chili will usually have cumin, okay? So for the curry and the cumin, think of recipes or food items that are predominantly made in East Indian cooking or South Asian cooking, those types of recipes. So things like butter chicken, vindaloo, stuff like that. Curry powder isn't always hot right away. It comes down to the more you add of curry, the hotter it will get. Now that doesn't mean to say that there isn't hot curry powder out there, because there certainly is. But if you're somebody who doesn't enjoy really hot food spicy wise, don't be alarmed that just because curry is associated with hot spicy food that you can't eat it. So a really good example of how to enjoy curry without the heat but the flavor is whenever I make a chicken salad for a chicken salad sandwich, I will add a little bit of curry to my chicken salad. And what it does is it just gives it a little bit of a different flavor. It gives it a little bit of a spiciness, but not hot spicy, just spicy. And it also gives it a really nice, beautiful color. Okay, so don't be afraid of curry if you want to give it a shot. Cumin always usually goes with curry powder to kind of help. It's one of those spices that kind of blends itself really well with curry powder, and it's just something that seems to go really, that you see in a lot of South Asian type recipes. Again, it just brings a little bit of a different flavor to things. It brings a little bit of a different spiciness to it. It kind of helps round out the curry powder a little bit. And then of course we have chili powder. Chili powder is of course one of the main ingredients in chilies. Now, chili powder again is one of those things that the more you add to it, the more the chili powder you add, the more flavor you're going to impart in your dish, and the hotter it's going to get, okay? But again, without the chili powder in chili, you basically have a spaghetti sauce. So my suggestion is make sure that when you're making your chili, that you add your chili powder to it. A lot of chili recipes will also call for cumin, okay? Again, it's a nice complementary spice to chili powder. It's a nice way to round out the recipe. And again, you can make your chili as hot as you want based on other things that you put into it as well, not just the heat from the chili powder itself. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is what is the most expensive spice in the world? And that is saffron. So here, so you've got some saffron. So this little amount of saffron, it's about just shy of a tablespoon, and you're looking at about $15 for just this little bit of saffron. Now, when it comes to actually using it and why you'd want to use it, and why is it so expensive? Well, first of all, the reason why saffron is so expensive is because of the very high maintenance crop to grow. It's very labor intensive. So saffron comes from the crocus family of flowers, and each flower only has 3 little stamens in it. And a stamen is essentially a thread. So you might not be able to see it very well, or maybe you can. But as you can see there are threads of saffron. So each flower only gets 3 of these. So that means that saffron has to be hand-picked, and each flower only has 3. So because it is such a fussy crop to grow, and because it's so labor intensive, that is exactly why it is considered the most expensive spice in the world. Now, why you would use saffron in a recipe is, number one, saffron has a very distinctive taste. It doesn't taste like anything else, at least in my own experience. And you always know when you're eating a dish that has saffron in it, because it is a very distinctive taste. It also lends a very beautiful color to whatever you're adding your saffron to. So let's say, for example, rice. A lot of people will make basmati rice, and they'll add a few of the threads of saffron to the basmati, and what will end up happening is it will color your rice a little bit of a yellowish color. Okay, a lot of people will use it in pudding. So for example, a vanilla pudding. A lot of South Asian or Indian foods will have saffron in it, okay? Now, the second most expensive spice on the planet is vanilla. So let's have a conversation about what the difference is between artificial vanilla and real vanilla, and why is artificial vanilla so much more cheaper than real vanilla. So to begin with, vanilla does come from the orchid family, so it comes from a flower, and that's another reason why it's expensive, is because orchids are very high maintenance, and they're very hard to grow, and they're very labor intensive. So anytime you have a food product that is like that, it is going to be expensive. The vanilla extract itself will come from vanilla beans. Okay, so one of these beans is about $2 a bean. You can buy them fairly common. They are common in a grocery store, but you are spending a little bit of money on them. And what they do to make the vanilla extract is they'll take a vanilla bean and they'll cut it open in half, and they'll scrape the seeds out. And it's the actual seeds themselves that give vanilla bean its flavor. In vanilla extract, there is no, in the artificial stuff, chances are, most of the time, there is no real vanilla in it itself. It is a combination of additives and preservatives, with a little bit of water and a little bit of alcohol, and a little bit of coloring to give it the dark color. Okay, that's why you are spending less money on artificial vanilla. Okay, real vanilla is the real deal. It is vanilla bean, high premium alcohol, and a bit of water, and that's all it is. And you can usually tell which is artificial versus the real, because number one, the price will dictate. So a bottle of real vanilla this size, this is about a half a cup of vanilla, and this is about $20. Okay, but this will also last you a long time. Artificial vanilla, you're looking here at about half a cup, and you're looking here at about $5. So $5 versus $20. If your budget doesn't allow for the real stuff, substituting the real to the artificial you can certainly do it without any difference in quality. A lot of people will use the artificial when they are baking something. So the flavor is still there, but it's not as noticeable. Whereas the real vanilla will get used when you are not baking something. So for example, ice cream. Okay. So if you can swing it, my suggestion is always to go with the real stuff. You can also make your own vanilla at home. What you will need though is you will need to go and buy yourself fresh vanilla beans. And again, they're about $2 a pod. And depending on how much vanilla you want to make will dictate how many pods you need. You will also need a fairly decent bottle of either vodka or brandy. And then what you'll do is you will take the vanilla bean, cut it open, scrape the seeds, put the seeds into the alcohol, throw the pods into the alcohol itself, seal it up, and then let it sit and marinate for about 3 to 4 months before you go to use it. So if you want to make your own vanilla for Christmas, you're going to want to start that about 3 or 4 months before your Christmas baking. The last thing that I wanted to go over is when do you use fresh versus dry when it comes to cooking? When you are making something that's going to be cooking for a long time, so for example, spaghetti sauce, soup, stews, you're always going to want to use dry spices, okay? So anytime that requires a little bit of a long cook, use dry. When you are doing anything that is a short cook time or you're going to be using it as an ingredient to eat fresh, that's where you are going to want to use your fresh herbs. So for example, a lot of people like to throw a little bit of chopped basil or chopped mint into a salad. A lot of people like to add it to their dressing to put on a salad. Anytime you want to take as a topping for pizza, that's where you're going to want to use your fresh herb. So for example, like I mentioned earlier, pizza that comes straight out of the oven, throw on some fresh basil and that will help give a little bit of a different flavor to your pizza. When it comes to storing your herbs, your spices, a lot of people will store their dry spices in a cupboard. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. If you have the room, sure. What I would suggest is if you do buy your spices, I would store them in the freezer for a longer shelf life. Now, the thing you have to remember with that though is your freezer is going to have humidity. So you want to make sure that you wrap up your container of dry spice in saran wrap, store it in a Ziploc bag, and then take the air out of that and put it into the freezer. When it comes to purchasing your spices, my suggestion is look at bulk. Buy bulk or go to a store that sells bulk and get a little bit of spices that way. That works really well if you have a recipe that only calls for a tablespoon of this or a tablespoon of that and you don't have to go and buy a whole container of spice. But if you are using a spice a lot, for example, salt and pepper, maybe buying bulk is the better option. You'll have to decide that for yourself. Another common spice in the kitchen that can be used for both baking and savory is cinnamon. So this is just ground cinnamon. You can also buy cinnamon sticks, and all cinnamon sticks are essentially this, but in a stick form. So this ground cinnamon is just cinnamon sticks that have been grounded down. Cinnamon is, to me, it reminds me very much of the fall when the weather's starting to change, apples, maple syrup, that kind of thing. It is incredibly fragrant. It can be a bit on the expensive side. A lot of people will use it to add a little bit of a heat to their dish, a little bit of spiciness. It does come from the bark of a tree. And as you can see, it can also give, because it's coloring my finger, it can also give a little bit of color to your dish. A lot of recipes, especially baking recipes, will call for cinnamon. But if you're not a home baker, having cinnamon in your kitchen pantry is a really good staple to have because there are a lot of savory recipes that do call for it. This concludes our discussion on spices and herbs. Thank you very much for your time and your attention, and enjoy the rest of your day.